Hello and welcome to episode 148 of The Dive Down, a Magic the Gathering podcast focused on the latest decks, trends, and strategies for the casual spike. My name is Stanislav here in Chicago, and with me on the line from Denver, Colorado, it's the one and only Shane Beeps.
Stanislav, I heard what you guys said last week when I was out. You said...
What did we say?
Some intriguing things about the Beach Boys.
Oh, do you have things about the Beach Boys?
You know, I don't. I mean, like, I'm a very casual Beach Boys fan. I've listened to Pet Sounds, a few times.
But you are a record person.
I like the harmonies. I used to be.
Yeah.
When I moved, I sold a bunch of stuff when I moved out here. I was just like, why do I have these records? They take up a lot of space. They're heavy.
Well, don't you like that warm analog sound?
No. I prefer the cold bits and bites of digital music, Stan.
Oh, yeah.
No, but it's good to see you both. I'm glad you had a tremendously successful episode without me, and I'm here to make this one that much worse.
Well, you wrote all the notes this time, so it's going to be all on you.
Yeah, I was in an airplane, and I was just like, I got to write some notes.
Who was flying the plane?
Well, that was my co-pilot.
Also, that's the Godfather, our third co-pilot on this episode, Dave Harburger.
Yeah, I'm kind of like the navigator. I'm kind of hanging around, checking the charts, but I'm not ever steering this plane.
You're swiping credit cards for Sky Mall purchases.
It's duty free. Duty free. You want some duty free?
Guys, can I tell you something?
Yeah.
I drank a cup of coffee an hour ago.
Oh, man. I can't wait for these caffeinated takes, my friend.
Yeah. It is 8:13 p.m. local time. Stan's like, I needed a coffee. Are you a guy who you're like a super old man where you're like, you know what I really want for dinner? I want to have some Indian food and a cup of coffee. Is that kind of where you're at?
Sort of.
Yeah.
I am the type of person who can take a nap after a cup of coffee and have frequently.
Yeah, after a cup of coffee, I just have like a deep sense of existential dread, and I kind of feel like my bones are shooting out through my fingertips, and I can't sit still. And then, it's a real thing. I usually have to go lay down after I have a real cup of coffee.
That's right. This week, Shane has made his triumphant return with stories of his adventures and misadventures in spooky Cleveland, Ohio.
We're not spending too long on that, are we?
No, I hope not.
Yeah, you're right. Instead, let's kick off the show with a breakdown of the results from the weekend's Modern MOCS tournament, as well as some details we got out of SCG Con. And we got some challenge results as well. So a lot of data on our Road to Las Vegas. Not a Road to Las Vegas episode, but in our hearts and minds, it certainly is.
This is a grab bag episode, my friend. This is some data. This is some mediocre spoilers and me catching up from last week doing an Esper Reanimator sort of little mini deck dive to talk about on the road to Vegas.
We're going to burn this format down with these spoilers from Crimson Vow. Let me tell you, we're going to be up all night. I'm so excited.
That's right. That's the dive down, our first look at Crimson Vow. Who's getting married? That's what I want to know. Before all that, we got a great housekeeping in store for everyone today. So take it away, Shane.
Oh, wow. You always read these. New patrons.
Wow, we had a lot this week. Thank you so much to everybody off the top.
Rules. I love, thank you. 6 new citizens of the Dive Down Nation. We've got Yushan M., Cody C., Taliesin H., Robert B., Dustin S., Chris K. Thank you all for becoming a citizen of the Dive Down Nation. We appreciate your newfound citizenship. Welcome to the Discord.
Yeah. Also, thanks to Tom W. for going up a tier in your support.
Right on. And we also have 2 new reviews. We have, I like this name, Patreon and review in the same week.
Question mark. Yeah.
And Rotary Fan. Thank you, Rotary Fan, for considering us tier 0 in this crowded market, this crowded tier list of Magic podcasts. We appreciate both your feedback.
I also like the review that we got from Patreon and review in the same week, question mark. The headline is perfect for the okay Magic player. I feel very good about that.
Yeah, I feel seen.
Yeah, thank you very much.
If you out there would like to support our show, you can find our Patreon over at patreon.com/thedivedown. We got a little bit of a Patreon announcement, right, Dave? New swag?
I mean, we have been given updates recently about designing the deck boxes. They are our $5 tier reward that we hit a stretch goal for a few months back. We've been working on the design. We are going to be turning in the art this week, and we showed people in the Patreon, the Nation, a few designs to pick from today. It's Sunday. If you haven't looked at them, haven't seen the Patreon posts, by the time you hear this, get over there and have a look. Feel free to give us feedback. We'll probably be finalizing art, but go have a look at what the designs are going to be. And hopefully we'll have them, as Stan and I talked about last time, early next year, shipped out and printed and everything.
Stan, how can people get their hands on these swag type items and get into the definitively discreet Dive Down Discord?
They would have to navigate to the URL patreon.com/thedivedown. The deck boxes, aforementioned, they're at the $5 tier. But if you can't afford $5, you can get in the Discord at $1 an episode, and then you join our Discord.
$3 is kind of the sweet spot. Like, you get the pins, you get the stickers, you get the tokens, all that kind of good stuff. $5, you also get access to the episode like a day or so early, which is pretty nice. I'm going to bring back the show notes. I'm sorry I've been slacking on the show notes. It's just like one more thing I'm not thinking about in the episode prep. But I know someone mentioned it this week. They were like, I missed the show notes. I'm like, you know what? I'm sorry.
I missed the thing that I think I'm paying you for.
Yeah.
Sorry about that, everybody.
I missed the thing you're contractually obligated to provide to me.
Yeah. We can provide all the former ones. We did the homework. We have the paperwork. Our dogs did not eat it.
It's all digital, baby.
In case you missed it, by the time this episode comes out, we will have a new bonus episode.
Oh,
yeah.
That's right, with none other than Mana Symbol Zach Ryle on this week's bonus. So if you didn't catch that a few days ago, get at it. And I also ordered a brand new shipment of playmats. We ran out of the previous stock. We got a bunch of new playmats coming in this week, and those will start shipping out to pending patrons soon. So a lot of ways to get some Dive Down swag, show off your love for the show, wherever you play Magic or just in the comfort of your own home.
Yeah, and we might even have more announcements about this coming up soon. Maybe other ways for you to have swag. Dun, dun, dun.
All right, also Mana Traders. I ran a decks for Mana Traders this week. ManaTraders.com. Sign up code the Dive Down 2021. 15% off first 2 months. Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Mana Traders. The Mana Traders.
We love you, Mana Traders.
All right, so Shane, you were on the news desk flying, a mile high?
Yeah, mile high. That's how 30,000 feet. That's like 1 mile, right?
You're a mile in the air. You're typing feverishly about decks
on terrible Southwest Wi-Fi. I like you, Southwest, but I don't like your Wi-Fi.
You've got Bamzing on your satellite phone.
Yeah, thank you, Bamzing.
Bamzing, right, give me those deets.
So what we
Bamzing's
did this
like,
week,
who is this?
Yeah, I think. Oh, the Dive Down. I know you.
How did you get my phone number?
Shane, are you one of the? Are you a co-host? So we had a lot of stuff happen this weekend.
I love your show, but I've never listened to it.
Yeah, exactly. I know a lot of people like that. So we had, first thing I want to talk about is the MOCS. So the MOCS is the Magic Online Champions Showcase. It is the season 2, one of those. I mean, I don't know. I guess it's like sometimes season 2 is worse, sometimes season 2 is better. This is the best because it just happened. So this is basically like the World Championships of Magic Online. Like it's because it's only 8 people qualify for this thing. It's the 4 showcase qualifier winners. There are 2 MOCS Open winners, and then there are 2 top players of the MOCS leaderboard. I honestly do not know what the MOCS leaderboard is, but there you go. That's how these people qualified. They're grinding, they're winning, they're succeeding on Magic Online. There's $70K in prizing overall for 8 people. That is good EV, my friends. The first prize
better.
The first prize is $20K. Pretty good. I wish I was playing in this event, but I'm not good enough. An awesome thing also about this is Randy Bueller put together, and I think consistently puts together like a spreadsheet of information and data about each of these 8 participants. And so now we know more about these folks, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about them because they worked really hard, and I think we should talk about how they got there, and then we'll talk about what decks they played and the results of these things. I guess it's also important to mention the MOCS is a modern and vintage cube draft split format, and I'll tell you what, it's 6 rounds. It is a really weird formatting for that much cash, and we'll talk more about the results of that and kind of what that actually tells us about modern, which is honestly not very much.
Interesting to see what decks people chose for this.
Yes, that's
this
the
format,
most important thing.
Just a random question. I think I can anticipate the answer. Do you guys know if this is going to continue into the future in this like murky landscape without organized play? Will we still have MOCS
I'm pretty sure we will.
Oh,
we
yeah.
have to, right? Because they'll always want to have MTGO showcases.
I think so. It's been going on so long. I think it's much lower overhead than running the Pro Tour or something like that. So I don't know why they would. Now, they might call it something like Super Premier Ultimate Qualifier Stakes 2 in the future, and we'll not know it was the same thing. But
Exactly. So let's talk about these players. The Pioneer Showcase Qualifier champion was out of Russia, Alex Ivanov, also known as Be Reborn. Dave, this guy's 41 years old. I still can make it.
You have a chance. Yeah,
I can still make it. They have 3,787 lifetime Modern matches on Magic Online, 57% win rate.
Okay.
The Modern Showcase Qualifier champion, Derek Davis out of the U.S., also known as MTG Derek. Dirk714 on Magic Online, 59% win rate over about 2,000 Modern matches. Legacy Showcase Qualifier champion, Phil Hellmuth. You may have heard his name once or twice.
Sure.
Listen to our podcast, Sam Rolfe. 1,500 Modern matches, 59% win rate.
Wow.
The Vintage Showcase Qualifier champion out of Switzerland, Nick Boney, also known as Shere Khan. Only 213 Modern matches reported. A mere 213 with a 60% win rate. In fact, Nick had the best overall win percentage across all formats, 66% win rate. If only I was winning 66% of my matches. We have the MOCS Open #1 champion, Logan Nettles out of the U.S., also known as Jabberwocky. This dude plays a lot of Magic.
Wow, I'm looking at these numbers right now. I cannot believe this.
No, okay. On his Twitter, his headline image, he has like a graphic that I think they posted from like some kind of arena event. And I don't know if this is inclusive of his Magic Online stuff or not. 43,000 lifetime matches, 66% standard win rate, 65.6% limited win rate. Bewley reports he has 36,000 total matches on Magic Online, 9,688 of those in Modern, 64% win rate in Modern, the best in the field.
Wow. Logan Nettles.
Seems okay.
Yeah, Jabberwocky's always interesting because I had somewhat less appearances in paper back in the day. I feel like not always on the Pro Tour, not always showing up in Grand Prix, but always, always, always there and always good on Magic Online for sure.
Yeah. MOCS Open #2 champion was out of Brazil, Marcela Almeida, also known as Mazinha Linda, excuse me. She doesn't seem to play much Modern. She has 271 matches on Magic Online, sub 50% win rate, which happens when you are probably focused more on things like Limited. I think she's a Limited grinder. Out of the top of the leaderboard, #1, U.S. Nathan Stoyer, 1,100 matches, 56% win rate in Modern. Jack Potter, also known as House of Mana MTG, 4,000 matches in Modern, 57% win rate. In fact, 65% of their lifetime matches on Magic Online have been in Modern, so they're clearly the specialist in that format. Okay, I just wanted to give those people a little bit of focus, a little bit of props there. But of course, this is a very small field and a split format. So the results aren't going to give us that much to work with. But like Dave said earlier, I do want to focus on the decks these people brought because they were playing for a lot of cheddar. So they probably put a lot of thought into their deck selection. Mazinha Linda was on a pretty stock Temur Footfalls. Shere Khan was on an Orzhov Hammer deck featuring Luris. It had 3 main deck Dark Confidant. That's been increasing in popularity as like this flex spot option. I still don't think it's settled upon, but I have been seeing Bob more often than I have in the past, and Shere Khan wanted to go with 3. He also had 3 main deck Thoughtseize, and so that kind of reduced the artifact total down to 4 Springleaf Drum, 4 Hammer, 1 Shadow Spear. Not playing with any kind of graveyard hate, not doing any kind of cranial planing stuff, just saying, hey, I want some hand disruption. I want to be able to disrupt combo decks, maybe control decks, things like that.
I love this Bob Hammer package. I played against it a couple times, and Bob always feels really scary in that deck just because enough of their cards cost 0 mana or 1, and it's just this really powerful card advantage engine. Maybe it's not as good as the Esper Sentinels, because I think like Esper Sentinels is another great card advantage engine, but I think Bob is probably the most interesting card I've seen in that flex spot that used to be Ingenious Smith and whatever else.
Yeah, why do you think it took so long to get to Dark Confidant in these decks?
Well, it costs 2, which is an issue. I think you have a lot of stuff that does cost 2, so you can't put like a Giver of Runes on 1 and then play something you want to protect on 2 as easily as when you're playing Bob. I think Bob is kind of like also a response to the control decks increasing in popularity, because you want to recover from that. You want to give them a target they kind of have to remove, things like that. So I think it's just, if this sits around, I'm going to recoup a lot of lost cards that you cost me in that matchup, especially.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. All right, next up.
Dirk714, pretty stock-looking 5-color elementals featuring Kahira, Be Reborn on a stock living end, Jabberwocky. Again, remember how many matches this person has played. 4-color Yorion Ephemerate Elementals stuff featuring Yorion. This is a pretty Logan Nettles deck, right? Like, he is a value deck player. Like, isn't he he's more of a mid-range, classic mid-range player, right?
Yeah, I mean, Logan had played Jund for a long, long, long time, and then switched later on to off of other things to that. I will say it's interesting that this is what we would call, this is the canister deck, kind of. This has Time Warp. This has Expressive Iteration. It's the 4-color deck that has more spells than a bunch of elementals, and it's got Ice Fang Coatl, it's got Eternal Witness, so you can do loops and all that kind of stuff. So definitely more of the controlling version of that build.
Yeah. Brother may have some loops. House of Mana MTG on Amulet Titan. I understand that Jack Potter co-hosts a podcast all about Amulet Titan, so that comes as no surprise. They are running 3-Karn the Great Creator main. Phil Hellmuth is on a stock Jund Saga featuring Luris, and Nathan Stoyer is also on Jund Saga featuring Luris. So the way this went down is they played 3 rounds of each format, and the 2 people who went 3-0 in each format played in the finals. Kind of a weird way to do it, and the finals were modern. So Marcela Almeida, also known as Mazina Linda, she went 3-0 in the draft pod. And then Nico Boni, also known as Shere Khan, with a mere 213 modern matches on Magic Online, or about 2 weeks of aspiring Spike streaming, went 3-0 with his Orzhov Hammer deck, and he ended up beating Marcella in the best of 3 finals. So there you go. A hugely valuable tournament with a super abbreviated amount of rounds, but it's a lot of money and some high profile modern. So I just wanted to focus on it and talk about it. And I thought it's worth paying attention to, because MOCS only happens, I think, just a few times a year. So we got to talk about it.
Yep. Yeah, I think this is cool. I mean, the journey was getting here, right? Like how people got qualified. That was the hard part for all of them. But it's awesome to see people play some high stakes and have modern be a relevant format for it. And hey, Orzhov Hammer, here it is.
Orzhov Hammer, a known good deck.
Yep.
Okay, next up though, we had the SCG Invitational, which happened at SCG Con. Another long-awaited, but also, unfortunately for us, split format tournament.
Return to paper. Is this the first big paper tournament besides Hunter?
Yeah, besides the Hunter Burton Memorial Open.
Yeah.
This is, I think, the first big paper event. And it was 16 rounds of competition, 8 rounds of standard, 8 rounds of modern. And so yet again, we can't really look at the results and know exactly how the modern decks performed. I also was really trying to find a metagame breakdown, but I haven't found anything about that. So I'm sorry. That would have been really cool to see, I think, because we would have seen what all these invitational grinders and players decided to bring and to the tournament. But we did get a list of the players and the decks that went 7-1 or better in modern. And they are Maxwell Paustian on Azorius Control, Shaheen Surani on Azorius Control. Is that someone who plays? I thought he was an aggro player. Next to Corey Baumeister, 7-0-1. I believe he ID'd last round. Grixis Death Shadow, the dress down version with Luris. Brad Nelson on Jund featuring? Weird. He's on Jund. This doesn't seem like a Brad Nelson deck. And then Kellen Pastor, 7-1 on 4-color Omnath. 4 of these 5 players made the top 8, so we'll talk about these decks a little bit more in a second. And so we got those top 8 decks. They are some of these I just mentioned. Kellen Pastor on 4-color Ephemerate Yorion stuff, pretty stock.
Pretty much the same as the list that Logan was running, but no, we're not running any Ice Fang Coatl here. So apparently didn't need it. But we're running. Actually, here's some stuff that's interesting about this deck. If you don't mind me pausing for a second.
If you saw something, go ahead, my friend.
So here's what I say: 2 main deck Dovin's Veto, and 4 main deck Spreading Seas. Quite often, these decks don't have Dovin's Veto main and only have a couple of Spreading Seas. Even the blue-white control decks generally only have a couple of Spreading Seas. at the expense of Ice Fang Coatl, which makes me feel like they probably don't really care all that much about the creature removal aspect of Ice Fang here and wanted to have some more mana disruption and stack interaction, which is pretty cool. Other than that, 3 Lightning Bolt, 2 Path to Exile, 1 Time Warp, 2 Abundant Harvest. It's kind of the rest of the deck kind of reads pretty normal. I mean, the nice thing about Spreading Seas, of course, is that you can blink it with Yorion. You can put it on a different land if you need to for some reason, but also you can. The big thing is you can draw another card with it, of course. So
it's also really good with Teferi Time Raveler.
Oh yeah,
if you play Seas on 2, Teferi on 3, it's a really good minus target, especially against an opponent that may not have the most greedy mana base. So you might not do that against someone like Tron, but against anyone else, if they already have whatever color you were shutting down with Spreading Seas, being able to draw more or less 2 extra cards off of it because of Teferi is really powerful.
Yeah. Of course, you can do the same thing with Abundant Growth too if you feel like that's what you want to do. So having 8 targets for that's pretty cool.
Speaking of Teferi, we do have Shaheen Sirani on Azorius Control featuring Kahira. He shows up, 8-0s with Azorius Control, makes a top 8. Some things never change about the SCG tour.
True. As usual, Shaheen even way back would show up when Blue-White was not good and still managed to top 8. Now when Blue-White is very good, it makes a ton of sense that he would be here doing the same thing. This deck, I would say, is pretty stock.
Yeah, it looks pretty stock. It's pretty controlling. 4 Solitudes are your only creatures. He does have a lot of castles, I noticed. I don't know if that's typically the number. Like he's got a couple.
Pretty normal these days to run at least 1 each of the castles, and he has 2 Castle Vantress, so he has 2 of the blue ones.
And he has a Colonnade and the big blue beater as well.
That's pretty normal right now, too. One Colonnade, 1 Storm Giant.
Got it. Corey Baumeister on the Dress Down Shadow featuring Luris. He's still trusting in the power and the combo potential of the Death Shadow and Dress Down. Who cares about Solitude when you're Corey B? You're pretty good at Magic. Dominic Polercio on Orzhov Hammer featuring Luris. He uses the Giver of Runes as his flex spot choice. All the black cards are in the sideboard. It has a main deck cranial plating as well. Mm-hmm. Pete Ingram on Azorius Control featuring Kira looks very similar, if not the same, to Shaheen's list. Cameron Sullivan on Jeskai Murktide. Basically, isn't Murktide, but Prismatic Ending main and Wear Tear in the side is good enough to splash for. And he ran 4 Consider main, along with 2 Serum Visions. This is a shift I've noticed over and over again, looking at decks from this weekend, and we'll talk more about that as we move on into the challenges. Brad Nelson, again, as I said, Jun Saga featuring Luris. Singleton, Dark Confidant in the main. Bob is back. Buy 4 copies from me. I have Bob's for sale.
You also have a shirt that says Bob's for sale.
I know, I do.
On it, yeah.
Logan Underwood, that's a joke, Dave. Logan Underwood on Grixis Luris pile. No Dress Down main.
Yeah, this is just to be clear. This is not a shadow deck.
No, so this is just Luris.
Grixis Luris, good cards. Snapcaster Mage for you.
Yeah, 7 out of 8 of these decks had companions. By the way, that's a take. So Corey B ends up winning the whole thing on Grixis Death Shadow Dress Down featuring Luris. Yes, in a world of solitude, Corey Baumeister comes out ahead with a Death Shadow deck. I mean, so correct me if I'm wrong here, but if you flash in a Dress Down in response to a Solitude, nothing's happening, right?
That's right. No abilities.
Sounds good to me. Good way to protect against Solitude. Better than a Blossoming Defense. Saturday's Modern Challenge. I guess before we go on to the challenge, you guys have any thoughts about the small amount of data we have from the Invitational here? Decks. There were some decks here. That's what happened.
Number 1, these people love Ragavan. That's one thing I would say. Half of these decks are Ragavan / Dragon's Rage Channeler decks, which is
it's an extremely good card.
I feel like it's something we haven't seen quite so much in a while. And then, other than that, people love companions. They're crazy for companions.
Also, just look at this murderer's row of nothing. What changed here? We were off of Paper Magic for over a year and a half.
Yeah.
And then SCG comes back, and we've got Pete Ingram, Brad Nelson, Shaheen Sirani, Corey Baumeister, just being like, what's up? We're going to top Kellen Pastor. I know that name. I probably should know some of these other people's names, but congratulations to all y'all making the top 8 and for Corey B winning it. Okay.
Now, people had to qualify for this tournament.
Yeah, this
right?
this is like a lot of like queued up qualifications, basically.
Yeah,
like
so
this
I
is
think
something that
helps with the name recognition part of this. I think some too. Shane, just because they had to qualify, so they have to be good players who get into this tournament as well. But still, yeah, this top eight's wild.
I mean, you can qualify. This is of course no one here is a slouch by any means going to this thing, but like you could qualify almost like a PPTQ, like at LGS is like the SCG qualifiers and stuff like that. So there's a lot of these things queued up, and I hope everyone who went had fun.
Absolutely. Stan, any thoughts about any of these decks?
Yeah, what do you think, Stan? Some decks?
Well, I guess Grixis Shadow, what an interesting deck to win the tournament. Obviously, Corey is an amazing player, a very practiced player too. This is the co-host of Verse Live. But I wonder if Dress Down Shadow is a little bit underplayed, or maybe it's just so tough to pilot that people don't really practice with it. Because this deck had a little bit of a heyday, invented more or less by Aspiring Spike. He played it at the Hunter Memorial. And then I feel like it totally dropped off. And here it is again. And I don't know, is this the power of the deck itself? Is it maybe just Ragavan deck in the hands of a good player? Or is this actually a good meta call? Dress Down against a Field Full of Solitude.
Yeah, I mean, I think Dress Down is just a really good card. We've talked about it, with Spike, us three, just the flexibility and things that this card does. I remember when we talked about it when we had the guys from Babel on, and it's just this card that does so many things, and the more you know about how to use it, I think you can get a lot of value out of it. And Corey B is the kind of player who can get max value, right? Like you said, Stan.
I also wonder with this deck in particular whether, one of the things David and I were talking about last week was not only the power and prevalence of these elementals, especially Solitude, but also how important Teferi is right now, and whether the combination of 4 Thoughtseize, 3 Inquisition, and 4 Drown in the Loch is enough, as well as Unholy Heat, is enough to actually deal with Teferi, to either pluck it out of a control player's hands or really quickly answer it once it gets down.
I would say too, so I've played this deck a little bit. I think this deck is pretty bad against Cascade, which is sort of a surprise because we're not seeing a lot of Cascade in this particular top 8.
Yeah, you're right.
And so maybe some of what's going on here is maybe he had a read that there wasn't going to be a lot of Living End or a lot of Urinos for some reason, and managed to navigate through that. Because I don't think that only having Drown or Inquisition or Thoughtseize as the cards that can help you disrupt that game plan is really that great. There's nothing in the sideboard that helps with it. There's no Void Mirrors. There's no Chalice. There's none of that kind of stuff trying to help you with the 0 casting cost spells. You're just kind of...
There's 3 EEs though.
Yeah, that's true. EE is good. I do think it's less good because EE is not good against Living End, right?
Sure.
So I, maybe
Soul Guide Lantern is.
That's true. Soul Guide Lantern is fine.
Soul Guide Lantern's pretty good against it, and I think Drown in the Loch and
Drown does help for sure. Yeah,
and I think Hand Disruption's fine. Kroxa too. Let's not underestimate the power of a Kroxa, especially in a deck with Dragon's Rage Channeler that can fill up the yard and just maybe get Kroxa online on turn 4 when you have the mana to cast it.
Yeah.
I faced down some Kroxa this week. Let me tell you what, that card's really good still.
I think it's good. Pretty good.
It's a pretty good card.
I'm bullish on Kroxa.
Yeah. I guess I might be off on my assessment there, but it is the one archetype that's sort of missing from this top 8 that I didn't hear much about on Twitter or anything. So we'll see. I mean, one of my favorite things about playing this core over the summer was Kroxa and being able to just take somebody's hand apart, definitely. But, sometimes you miss or your timing of your discard is bad, and then you just get taken out by a real haymaker spell, and that can be brutal.
I'll do a league with it for next week, and we can revisit this question.
I mean, we probably have time for one more Road to Vegas episode, realistically, right? Between spoilers and between other stuff. Maybe we'll talk at the end of the show about what's on the list for the final one of those. But you could look at Grixis piles. We've looked at Jund, which is a lot of these cards as well.
This has blue.
Well, that's true.
That's right, Dave.
Moist Jund. Okay, can we finally move on to these modern challenges, please? Okay, so we've got the Saturday challenge. We've got full deets on that one. Okay. Meta breakdown courtesy of Bamzing. Thank you, Bamzing, unofficial fifth co-host. Never been on the pod. Okay, so the metagame breakdown out of the top 32. 6 isn't Murktide. 3, 4-color Ephemerate featuring Yorion. Couple Boros Burn featuring Lurrus, 1 without Lurrus, so that's 3 burn decks. 2 Yawgmoth decks, 2 Temur Footfalls, 2 Living End, 2 Jeskai Murktide. That's basically 8 Izzet Murktide decks. 1 Mono White Hammer, also 1 Orzhov Hammer featuring Luris. Then we have a bunch of one-ofs: Amulet Titan, Mill, Shadow, Jund Saga, Jeskai Control Affinity featuring Yangatha. 4-color Creativity, Through the Breach, Temur Breach Station, and Grixis, Dragon's Rage Challenger, Luris Pile type stuff. Notably missing Azorius Control. Jund Saga, I also feel like, is dropping in popularity on Magic Online lately. We did see it perform well in the SCG Open. That's kind of one of the reasons I did want to talk about all these different kinds of tournaments, is because I think people say a couple different things. People say a lot of things, as you may have heard.
People really say Chicago's a big burn meta. I don't know if you've heard that before.
No, that's a Denver meta.
Oh, it's a Denver meta. Yeah.
So what's interesting though is that people say that the Magic Online meta is ahead of the paper meta by a good amount. And so this could be the case where it's like Jund Saga, I think, did pretty well this weekend at the SCG Invitational, but those are also like the kind of players who can play and want to play a deck like Jund Saga. But I'm curious to see if Jund Saga continues to sort of have this dip, like I feel we've been seeing over the past few weeks, where it's like 1 Jund Saga, 2 Jund Saga, instead of like a couple in the top 8, like I felt we were seeing for a while. All right, heading into that top 8, we've got Doom Switch, not Doom Wake. On Izzet Murktide, I earlier mentioned that increase in considers in the main deck of Izzet Murktide, and here Doom Switch is running 4.
So I've been playing some Jeskai Murktide lately.
Yeah.
Basically, not in preparation for this episode, but ahead of this episode, I was playing Jeskai.
Yeah, it's a good deck.
It is, and that was on Thought Scour still, and every time I cast the Thought Scour, I thought to myself, I wish this was actually a consider.
Why?
Because
over here's Thought Scour?
Yeah.
None of these have Thought Scour in them, by the way.
Yes.
That's what's been replaced. That's what it replaced. Okay.
So here's my thinking. This being a control deck at heart, in this type of very, well-defined metagame, and you have really strong answers to specific other decks and strategies, a card like Thought Scour doesn't let you dig for answers as well as Consider does. However, I don't think Consider is significantly worse at filling up the graveyard than Thought Scour, even though it seems like it would be, because you don't even need Thought Scour to fill up a graveyard to get a big old Murktide out. And there was no shortage of games where I was casting 7/7s or 8/8s without ever casting a Thought Scour.
Yeah.
But plenty of games where I was casting a Thought Scour and I didn't feel like I was actually looking for a card. I was just kind of hoping I would draw into it.
You're just bulking. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. So it's almost like it's sort of a win more in the graveyard filling thing. Like, you're not casting a Gurmag Angler on turn 2. You're just saying, like, I need to actually get some selection here with my Consider, and the value of the selection is actually higher than digging with a Thought Scour, or just like simply like Dave said, just massive cards in my graveyard.
I kind of think that's where we're at right now, and Consider being able to actually bin a card makes it significantly better than Opt, and maybe hits that sweet spot between Thought Scour and Opt.
Sweet. Yeah, I'm glad to see Consider getting some play.
We thought it was good enough.
Yeah. I mean, this was the card that everyone was like, it's going to break. Is it Murktide, right? And then it basically maybe got tested a little bit, and people were like, I guess I just want Thought Scour, or I want like 3 or 4 Serum Visions because I want the sorcery. And they're shaving Serum Visions down to a 2 frequently. I also see more interaction. Like, there's 3 sort of main deck non-counter spells. There's a couple Spell Pierce here and a main deck Force of Negation. Maybe 1 or 2 more main deck counter spells than has been typical over the last month or so. So Doom Switch, I think has been playing this pretty regularly. That's what I read on the tweets. So congratulations to them. We got Big JC00 on Amulet Titan. Looked pretty stock to me. Oskia, we definitely see this name pop up pretty often in these challenges on Izzet Murktide. This is another build similar to Doom Switch's. It has the 4 Consider. It has a Force of Negation. It has an additional Spell Snare. Bringing that classic back. Stan's eyes widen because he loves himself a Spell Snare. Maybe they were expecting a lot of Reanimator with like all the 2 mana spells that's in that deck. I don't know.
I mean, you can grab some good 2 mana spells. You can grab an Expressive Iteration from someone that you're playing against. You can grab Renin 6. I think we're maybe in a spot where there's a good enough to start thinking about it. Main is pretty wild to me, but yeah.
It's just one of those things, like if you're on the draw and you have it, you just get them. and you're just like, I got him.
Yeah, I mean, it counters Counterspell too, by the way,
Sure
which
does.
is nice to keep in mind with that card. But
Good point. All right, 4th place, Juju Bean, 2004 on Demir Mill, featuring Luris. 5th place, Beastie on Is It Murktide. This one's pretty interesting. They are apparently testing the value of a Singleton Royal Science, a Singleton Jace Ringe Prodigy. No considers in this one.
oh well, this one has Thought Scour instead of Consider, so they're still running a single mana graveyard card. But
Dave, I'm just pointing out the differences, my friend. But also, one thing I found interesting, though, is that they, I believe they were saying they wanted a Brazen Borrower in the main. I think Doom Switch and Oskia both had Brazen Borrowers in theirs. So bring your Brazen Borrowers, my friends.
Whoa, hold on. Beastie.
Okay, I'm holding.
Beastie. Also running
Yeah.
Royal Scions and Jace Prince Prodigy.
That's exactly what I said, my friend.
But we should talk about why.
No. Okay, yeah. I mean, they're looting engines, and they're
I think they're there to prevent you from flooding out.
sure.
Is really what it's there for. Because
I love not flooding.
This deck is kind of oddly prone to that.
yeah, I could see that. I mean, you see so many of your cards, you are always going to be able to play a land whenever you want because you have so many cantrips, so much card draw, and so that makes sense to me. I mean, the abilities themselves of Royal Scions are like fine. I mean, loot is good.
They're fine.
I think that occasionally you might be into plussing it to give +2/+0 and first strike and trample to your Ragavan so that it can attack into things occasionally, which is nice.
Or a Murktide Mirror.
Sure, it makes your Murktide bigger than their Murktide. That makes sense too. Sweet card.
Yeah.
Jace Finch Prodigy is also just always kind of good, but boy,
It's just
so narrow.
always on the fringes.
I find that selection a little iffier. I'll be interested to see if it sticks around just because I think the fact that Dead and Gone and Fire Ice and all these incidental burn spells kill it that are just flying around the format, I think makes Jace a little bit of a liability.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I don't know. With these Murktide decks, you play so many lands off of Expressive Iteration that you just end up having like 3-4 extra lands in your hand so often that
Loot 'em.
I really feel like this Royal Science tech might be onto something.
It should be playing Faithless Looting, I think. So 6th place in this tournament, 1st place in Magic Online pun names, Moto Baggins on Grixis Dress Down Shadow featuring Luris.
There we go.
7th place, Scipios on 4-color Ephemerate Yorion. 8th place, Demonic Tutors on
Again.
Yawgmoth. Yes, this guy's been killing it in challenges lately, bringing Yawg awareness to the masses yet again. I don't know how they're doing it. It's just like clockwork with Yawgmoth.
I mean, we talked about this list a good amount last week, actually. Stan and I did, but I will say, if we're thinking about a short list of cards to have on our, like, the Rogues of Vegas, we haven't ever really spent that much time talking about. We talk about Yawgmoth in passing all the time, but we've never talked about it, or
It's a hard
play
deck.
tested it for the show. I don't believe. It might be
Shane, I
time.
thought you had it. Like, I think this is your responsibility.
I own it. I'm just gonna have. I'll just record a tutoring session with Aaron from the Nation, and then that'll be my portion of the episode.
Does Aaron sound good?
Sounds great.
Okay.
He's the best.
voice.
All right, book it.
All right. Sunday's challenge, we have the top 8 deck list again from Bamzing. Let's just rush through these. Mono White Hammer, Stefan Dima 413. They went 10-0. P good. Second place, Belcher, ZYX Jerry was on that. Third place, Jabberwocky. Have I heard that name before? On 4-color Ephemerate featuring Yorion. Yes. Logan Nettles does not so great at the box. Comes back on Sunday to play the challenge, takes 3rd place. 4th place, Orzhov Hammer featuring Luris with a Tickle Me Tarantino's on that. Fracom 94 in 5th place on Boros Burn featuring Luris. SWFF on Is It Murktide. Wizard 2002 on Teamer Footfalls. And Pichio 36 on Amulet Titan. Okay, that was a lot of decks. That was a lot of places. That was a lot of names, a lot of lists. And I still don't know if we learned anything. I mean, like, for real. Like, what did, like,
Big picture. If you're going to boil this into a couple of points, let's each give 1 point that we see here that we feel like big picture we can do, and then we can do where you're angry about stuff after that, Shane. But
I'm not even angry. I don't know what we learned.
so let's hear it. Stan, what do you think you learned from going through all this?
That Is It Murktide, being on a recent downswing over the last few weeks, is starting to update its internal technology to run a little bit more smoothly and actually be competitive again at the top tiers of the meta.
You took mine. That was exactly what I was going to say. I think the biggest takeaway from this whole thing is that Murktide was better this week for some reason than it was before. Now, what, why, how, I don't know, but I'll say something else that was kind of missing from here. Two things. We didn't talk a ton about Crashing Footfalls or Living End, although it was present in a number of places. It wasn't at the top of the list in a lot of them.
Teferi 3 is everywhere, or they feared it was.
Yeah. And then the other thing is there's only been some 4-color elementals builds that we covered last week, like the deck that I played last week, but there's a lot of Yorion Blink still. So all of those 4-color decks seem to be coalescing around the more controlling versions than they are around the creature version at this point to me. All right, so what was a big thing that you learned then, Shane?
Well, I just sort of felt like...
No, before you say this, I want to know the one takeaway.
Okay, one takeaway. Yeah. Okay, so my actual takeaway was going to be in my final scree here was that Modern is a skill format.
Okay.
More than a best deck format. Like you see players, you see names more than you see decks. You see people winning with all of the known good decks, and it just is sort of scattershot and cyclical, as a metagame should be, in terms of what's showing up and what's winning a little bit more frequently than it was before. And I think that what we really see is that pilot skill matters an awful lot, because we see the same people showing up over and over again. And, the SCG Invitational was especially absurd in that so many classic SCG names just showing up with, whatever deck that they thought they would do well with and killing it. I think what I really want people to take away, and for me to take away, which is really hard because of the way we run this podcast, is that if you're a casual Spike tier player, which if you're listening to us, you probably are, just stick to a deck. Like, don't chase. Don't deck chase. Like, if you want to understand if you have a small amount of time to play every week, you're getting like a couple leagues in, understand your matchups with like a single game, with like a single deck. Like, understand your game plan in matchups, because I think that's where you're going to get your edge in Modern more than like a few percentage points in your deck selection. You're going to get a lot more value, I think, both in terms of your play experience and in terms of your win rate by just learning one or two decks as best you can. That's my takeaway.
All right. That's the news, and we're sticking to it.
Before we actually fly out to Nevada, we probably won't do this today, but I need you guys to tell me what I should play. Maybe that could be the last thing we do on the last episode before the actual tournament, because there's just, to Shane's point, there's so many good decks right now. And all three of us, or 2/3 of us who are playing, I think we have experience and the access to several different powerful archetypes. I know I'm going to need some help actually settling on something.
And you're going to get Audible the night before anyway.
Well, yeah, but your input.
At least we put in the work beforehand.
That's right. Your input will still be factored into that Audible decision.
I'll tell you what you both have to play.
Okay, I appreciate it.
I have an idea for Shane. I have a better idea for Shane than I do for myself.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
All right, good job, team, on another excellent breakdown. A lot of tournaments, a lot of decks, a lot of fun talking about them. We're going to take a quick break, and when we return, we are going to dive into a quick chat about Shane's experience playing and experimenting with Esper Reanimator.
Shane Quick. Okay. Challenge accepted.
We're going to look at what has helped this deck become a little bit more prevalent in the metagame. I've been playing a lot in leagues. It won a challenge last week in the hands of Everett Mohan, an aspiring competitor who I think shows a lot of promise. And then we're going to go right into some Crimson Vow spoilers after that. So stay with us. Lots to come. Don't go anywhere.
And we're back. Like we said, in a mini Road to Vegas, or Road to Consideration for Vegas segment, let's say, Esper Reanimator, that's a deck that we've talked about a couple of times, that we've been experimenting with here and there over time, and it finally won a big event last week. And Shane, as our resident Esperman.
More of a Reanimator man.
Oh, that's true, because you are more into the black-white.
Orzhov builds. Yeah.
So Shane decided to pick it up and do some play with it this week and has some thoughts, has some questions, and wanted to take us through it as just another list to check off of our list.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't here last week, so you got to hear me talk even more from the breakdown. Well, let's breeze through this as fast as I can.
Yeah, I mean, this
right?
wouldn't have fit in with the theme last week anyway, so it's good that we didn't try to jam it in, because last week was all about 4-color.
No, this would have, man.
It's 4-color. This isn't 4-color.
Because the reason this deck is back is because it has elementals.
Oh, okay.
It would have fit in.
TikTok.
Okay. Yeah, right. So, friend of the show, Aspiring Spike, won a challenge with this the other weekend on his latest build of like the Esper Reanimator. People seem to think this is the one that's like the right one, at least for the moment. Everett always does cause that big spike bump when he does well with the deck.
Yeah. Or when he gets on a
podcast,
podcast, to be fair.
Yeah, exactly. I think this one's no exception. But Spike wins with a lot of things. And he's also a very good player. His decks don't always translate perfectly into long-term successes, which is kind of amazing, honestly. Like, the dude is so good at winning with his decks that he's been successful with his good decks and his average decks.
Lends a little bit of credence to what you were saying at the end of the breakdown there, that
Yeah.
that it's a skill
players
format.
win.
Yeah, the good players win.
Players like Ross Miriam, Tan and Grace over on MTG Rants were saying that they would both be playing it at SCG Open. The Invitational. I know that Ross was there. He did play it. Lee McLeod over on Grindcast was going to play it as well. But, what makes this version of Esper Reanimator special? After the release of Faithful Mending in Midnight Hunt, people wanted to see how we're going to build a powerful Esper shell with a reanimation package, trying to leverage the power of Faithful Mending. So it's like counterspells, considers, Teferi Time Ravelers. That's the kind of stuff that was like going into these Orzhov shells that existed and getting rid of like Hand Disruption, maybe the Grief Ephemerate package. Mole Drifter started showing up as like this sort of divination variant that could be reanimated when more cards were needed. But these Esper decks were like not quickly getting solved and not really doing that well early on. But Spike seemed to not give up, and he sort of, I think, realized like, why don't we just get rid of these stupid counterspells, get rid of this air like Consider, and just play these busted elementals along with Ephemerate. Let's generate some value here. And so his deck is pretty tight. It's like 4 Grief, 4 Solitude, 4 Ephemerate, the reanimation package with like the playsets of Archons, Persist, Unmarked Grave, Faithful Mending, 3 Teferi Time Raveler because it's Teferi Time Raveler.
Because it's pretty much the best card, and definitely was the best card last week. But
it's also good. It's good in this deck for protecting what you're trying to do as well. 3 Mole Drifter for that card draw value, especially with Ephemerate. You blink that Mole Drifter, you draw a lot of cards. 3 Prismatic Endings because you play Prismatic Ending. He has 2 Unburial Rites, which is a card that he just seems to like a lot more than most people. I still don't love running 1, let alone 2. I think 1's handy now and then, but that's one critique I would make because I didn't like 2.
I mean, the only thing about this is that, not to point out the obvious, but the thing that's nice about it is that it's a card you can pitch early to Faithful Mending and still get value off of later, since you can play it out of your graveyard. So I think that's probably the main reason. Yeah,
it's not bad by any means. It's just like, it's like you only have so many slots, and so it's like, what are those going to be? And so the sideboard is stuff like 4 Thoughtseize, because sometimes you want Thoughtseize against like combo, control, whatever. One of the commitments he made here is 4 Leyline of the Void. Pretty big decision to hate out opposing graveyard-based strategies. He's got extra copies of Teferi, Prismatic Ending, a couple Fatal Push for like some fast interaction when you need it against Ragavan, probably. The Sarah's Emissary for when that's a lights out card to reanimate, a couple Stony Silence. And it's sort of confusing until you realize that Stony Silence stops a lot of the common graveyard hate in Modern, which requires an artifact to be tapped or an artifact to like be sacrificed in order to do much of anything.
Yeah, I think this is a card that is very moment dependent, because exactly what you said, but if people start switching over to where they feel like they have to run Leyline, then
exactly.
It's not going to be worth it anymore. And Stony Silence isn't here to like help you against Affinity or really to help you all that much against Hammer. Honestly, it's really to help you.
No, it does not. Against it can be useful. Like you have, it does stop. It stops everything but the Sigarda's Aid stuff, which can be useful for sure. It even stops treasures, which can be valuable, right? So this deck's been doing well since he won. It's been fine. Like it got Sokos 13, took it to 21st place like the very next day after I think Spike won. Fletcher Hartman took a very similar deck to the NRG series trial event here in Chicago. He got 21st place as well. It's been, of course, in the 5-0 dumps. But we don't have like a ton of data, but it looks like, and people seem to think that it's a viable deck. It's using powerful cards. It has a powerful strategy in the reanimation, in the ephemerate. And so it's like, hey, I've been playing a lot of Reanimator. I've been playing a lot of Reanimator over the past few months. Let's see what this deck's doing. Let's see how I feel about it. Because I haven't been convinced, of course, about like the ephemerate-based decks, with Grief especially.
Yeah, I mean, you hated that early on when you were playing these packages. You were like, no.
It's not what I want to be doing. And so, but now this has other things to ephemerate. It has, Mull Drifters. It has Solitude. I haven't played with Solitude before. I didn't really love the Esper decks before with like Counter Magic and stuff like that. So I was just like, maybe this is the magic build that's going to feel like everything's clicking. And, why is this deck well positioned at all in the first place, right? And I think there's a couple reasons, and the format itself is one of them. I sort of feel like it's gone into sort of a battle cruiser type mode lately, like these big controlling decks like Azorius Control, the Elementals decks are being challenged by like these bigger value engines like the 4-color Yorion Ephemerate style decks. And the hyper aggro strategies are being sort of hindered by all these Furies, by the Solitudes, by the Omnas that are taking up all the air in the room. And so maybe there's room in the format for this somewhat slower, this somewhat more interactive Reanimator deck to thrive a bit more and sort of try to keep up with the value those decks are creation, or outvalue decks like Azorius Control because they're so popular right now. Because like the biggest thing this deck can do is generate a ton of value with Ephemerate. Like the Elementals, including Mull Drifter and Grief and Solitude, depending on the board state or the game state, you can just be like, well, this 1 mana white spell is doing so much for me. Whether it's drawing like 4 to 6 cards, or it's taking 2 to 3 cards out of your opponent's hand, or it's killing a bunch of creatures on the opposing side of the battlefield. That's a lot to be doing, especially when you have the reanimation package to get the really powerful Archon of Cruelty on the board, or maybe if you brought in Sarah's Emissary, that can be lights out against certain strategies as well.
Yeah, and I think one big thing that this does well, too, is that it helps you go into a good Teferi game on turn 3 if you can line up to get rid of a bunch of creatures with Solitude or get rid of a bunch of cards with Grief. So you can be able to see what someone's doing and then put Teferi down and kind of put your shields up when they don't have a way to interact with Teferi, and then you can do whatever you want on your turn.
For sure. I definitely, there's a lot of ways this deck can win a game. And you can go over the top of a control deck, exhaust them of resources. You can win on turn 3 by just simply reanimating an Archon. There's just a lot of ways to get value out of the deck. And I think another reason that people are playing this Esper version as well is because you get access to cheap hand interaction, cheap board interaction in black, you get stack interaction in blue, you get prismatic ending, of course, one of the best spells in the format, a lot of lights out white sideboard cards you might want. Like, this is why people play Esper in the first place. And then, of course, you have this game plan of reanimation just always there to have access to. And it's just a solid pick in some ways because it's flexible. Like, you can be really fast. Like, you can reanimate an Archon on turn 3. You can evoke out an Elemental and blink it to, like, clear the board, or you can clear their hand. You can grind things out with, like, the Ephemerate-based card advantage and just sort of, like, maneuver yourself into resolving a persist on turn 11 and just getting that Archon value, and it goes unanswered one turn, and you're going to win the game. Like, I've definitely won games by picking apart, like, a combo player's hand with Grief and Ephemerate. I've won games reanimating an Archon on turn 3. I've won games on turn 12 in that the attrition situation. But I just said all those things about winning games in various ways, but I think it's a risky pick because I've lost plenty of games because I just didn't have a way to stop what my opponent was doing. Like, maybe they countered a few of my meaningful spells, I sort of sat there doing nothing while they just killed me over a few turns. Like a dashed Ragavan can be a nightmare. You know what I mean? Just like they can pick away at you and have mana up to counter what you're doing, or just generate a different kind of value than you. Like I have this interesting game I keep thinking about because it was against Grixis Luris, or no, it was just a Rakdos deck, and they had a Torpor Orb against me, right? And then that stops a lot of what I'm doing, and in terms of my elementals. And then they also had Kroxa. So they get a 2 mana 6/6 that, of course, when it comes into play, it doesn't do anything either. But when it attacks, it's attacking my hand in a pretty similar way, actually, to how Archon works, right? And so it's just like there's different ways that decks can get value out of a single card. I mean, in that case, it was 2 cards because of the Torpor Orb. But it's just like, oh yeah, you don't have to go through a bunch of hoops to do something powerful. And more on that in a little bit later. But there's a lot of ways for the opponent to sort of stop what you're doing and get under you or disrupt you enough to turn the corner faster than you can. And the deck still sort of feels like it always has to me, which is a synergy-based deck, rather than a deck where these individual pieces are powerful on their own. And that means things like your spell timing is more important. Your interactions between the cards in your deck are more important. You're more reliant on understanding those interactions and then also having access to those interactions by drawing the cards you need. And so that doesn't always really happen. Like you don't always get the synergies you need just in your hand.
You mentioned Torpor Orb. Dress Down's also pretty good against this deck, isn't it?
It can be, of course, for sure. Like it's good against the elemental action, of course. The problem with Torpor Orb is that it sticks around unless I draw into a prismatic ending, is kind of the main issue. But yeah, Dress Down, if that's going to make a little bit of a comeback, that's kind of a pain in the butt too, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the tough thing about this deck is like knowing what things are pieces that you only get value off of when you wombo combo them, and knowing what things are valuable just to play or just to use at any time. And I see one note you have here in the notes about evoking Muldrifter as a divination and how often you should do that or not do that. I think you probably do it a fair amount if you don't have anything else to do on turn 3.
Yeah,
but that's just me.
The thing. I mean, that kind of gets to one of the issues I had with the deck, which is like, one, like you said, Dave, is sort of getting max value out of the pieces. And like, is it one of those things where it's just like, hey, do I need to have Ephemerate around to hit my Muldrifter, or am I just casting this because I have somebody to do with 3 mana? But it's also like these pieces rely, the pieces to get max value out of them relies on having them in your hand, and you have to mull so much to have an initial plan. And it might be one of those things where it's like, maybe I just need to hope that things are going to come together and just sort of play a reactive game and just assume I'm going to draw into a white card, or just not have to worry about, do I have Unmarked Grave persist going on type thing. And so it just sort of feels like, especially with the evoke elementals, is when you're mulling to that initial game plan, that then having to go down a card to play a Grief before turn 4 or a Solitude before turn 5, where you're doing the pitch thing and going down that card. If you don't have the Ephemerate to sort of get the card value back, or you don't have a persist to maybe persist it back, instead of getting an Archon back out of the graveyard, for example, then it's like, what am I doing here? Like, I'm just sort of shredding my hand after I already mulled to 5.
Right.
And that feels really bad. And I just sort of felt like I still miss the cheap hand disruption spells in a deck like this, because like I still have never, there's been times where like, yeah, Grief has won me games, but those games are much fewer than I felt like I have won with my old Orzhov build, where I'm running like 7 hand disruption spells, and on like turn 3, I'm clearing the way with an Inquisition or a Thoughtseize that my opponent either has to use their counter magic on that, or I get it out of their hand, and then I cast Persist. And I can't do that same thing, especially like on a mull to 5 or 6 or something like that, because it takes 2 cards with my Grief to do the same thing, to get 1 card out of their hand, potentially. And then I'm like, well, this is either card inefficient or potentially mana inefficient to do what I was already doing with just the classic Thoughtseize and Inquisition of Kozilek. And that is something I still have never been able to get over, where it's like, yes, if I'm playing against like a Through the Breach deck and I Grief Ephemerate them, then I'm going to win. But if any other time, it's not doing enough.
Force Negation is not great against this deck, but if you do get them to Force Negation your Ephemerate early on, then you probably win, because then they don't have it for your Persist later. And so that's neither here nor there, I guess. But, I do think that this is a deck where I kind of wonder about its potential to be a staple or tier 1 or even longtime tier 2. I just kind of feel like it's probably a deck that had a good moment played by a pilot that was really good, and then a couple other people picked it up in the middle of a good moment too, and you kind of go from there. I don't know. What do you think about this, Stan?
Might be the best graveyard deck we have right now, other than Living End. Like I think it might be a little more powerful than Dredge.
Murktide's is that a graveyard deck too, or no?
I wouldn't say Murktide's a graveyard.
It just
deck.
has a payoff. Yeah.
That's
fair.
But like between this and Living End,
Dredge is not bad right now. We haven't seen a lot in the big events, but we do keep seeing people trying it out in the queues and things like that.
I think Dredge probably has a hard time against blue-white control, whereas this and Living End might have a little bit more game against them. Mm-hmm. And I think in some cases, this is more resilient to the hate that can punish Living End, whereas you can just hardcast an Archon, and people have done that against me.
Yeah.
And I've done that against other people, thanks to my Ragavans, and that's usually just game over too. Whereas Living End, like just hard casting a single 5/5 doesn't really have the same punch.
Yeah, Stripe Weaverwinder is not good enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do feel like the times when I was getting to be able to hard cast an Archon were few and far between, because if I'm getting to that game state, it's frequently against a slower deck that might be running counter magic, and otherwise I don't have enough in terms of my interaction often to stop what my opponent was doing. Because it's like, unless you get the perfect lineup where it's like, I have a Solitude, and I have an Ephemerate, and they're playing a creature deck, or something like that. Or in the case we were talking about before, where it's like, they're playing a combo deck, and I have Grief, Ephemerate, or something like that. And that is where I'm getting max value. And so it just always feel like everything has to line up really perfectly. And I think at the same time, I want to talk a little bit more about this in a minute, I think this is a big brain deck, where it's like you are playing pieces that interact more than just have individual power levels, and therefore you have to know how to squeeze every bit of juice out of these cards, these weird juicy cards. So I think that there is just a lot of learning curve there as well. It plays differently than maybe the Orzhov build did in general.
May I ask just a couple quick questions that might help us wrap this up? What do you think is
in a hurry?
Well, no, it looks like you're getting toward the final sections of your notes.
Oh, I am.
What do you think is the single best hate piece against a card like this? Like, is it Rip? Is it...
Leyline and Rip are... Leyline's the hardest, because it's really hard. You actually have no way to make 4 different colors of mana in this deck, unless you wanted to be like run the spicy Triome.
You can only bounce with Teferi, I think. At
right.
That point.
Yeah, or you could bounce with Teferi, yes. And then you'd have to sort of, unless if they could recast it, then they could just bring it back down. So you'd have to be able to bounce with Teferi and then squeeze your
and then grief
spell
it, maybe.
In. Yeah, there are ways.
Yeah,
but I think Leyline's pretty rough. But I think what's interesting is that I think rather than the individual piece of hate that is best against it, I think it's just the fact that there's just so much. Right? Like everyone has graveyard hate because it's so easy to run. And it's so easy to run for value. It's so easy to tutor up with Urza Saga if you're playing it. Do you know what I mean?
Right. But how worried are you about a Soul Guide Lantern?
Very.
I just feel like a single Soul Guide Lantern is just like this one shot where you can just persist Unmarked Grave the turn after they cash in their Lantern.
For them to cash in the Lantern required me putting something in the graveyard that
was worth it.
Want to get rid of. So that already required a previous spell, right? So either I had to hit something on my Faithful Mending, or I had to cast a previously drawn Unmarked Grave, and then have like another one in reserve. So it's like, it's easy to think about, yeah, if I draw every card I want over like the first 15 draws of my deck or something like that, then yeah, I get to the point where I'm going to win.
But you are drawing a lot. Your Mulch Drifters draw you cards like crazy.
But that's if I have Ephemerate. So if I evoke a single Mulch Drifter, I draw 2 cards. I basically cast a Divination, which is not a modern power level card. So it's like, this is just sort of getting back to like the best case scenario versus like the scenario, right? And the scenario that happens a lot is me scraping by trying to recover from either early mulligans or the pieces not lining up perfectly, or just not getting one of my 4 Ephemerates, or having a Faithful Mending like not really hit what I need, or flooding out, or getting an Unmarked Grave countered and not having another one. And so that's the kind of stuff that happens a lot, is that I'm on the back foot and it's not coming together where I'm getting to where I need, because it's a synergy deck.
All right, so bottom line. Or do you have something else before we get to the bottom line?
No, I think it's about
All
right.
Bottom line. We're talking about lists of, not about where, like, we're talking about lists that we have under consideration to take for you guys to play in the main event at Vegas, right?
Yeah, I'm off this deck.
Right. You were someone who was on this deck before it was cool.
I think I would rather play my Orzhov version still.
Wow.
I'd still rather play my Orzhov version.
Okay.
And people think, I mean, that's probably wrong, because I probably will like play a Stoneforge out and she'll get Fury'd. And I'll be like, oh yeah, people play Fury now, or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, it's probably not going to work like I want it to.
Were you not impressed with Teferi?
Guess what?
Everything.
I mean, it's good against
It's good against everything.
I mean, here's how every game it's like, okay, I resolve it against blue-white control. They don't let you resolve it. Like, it's just like, I mean, I could eventually resolve it. It's like, if maybe there's a long game that needs to be won, right? But it's like,
well, but you shouldn't let them have the cards that let them counter your Teferi. Don't you see?
Then he has to have Grief and Ephemerate, though.
If only I start with everything I want in my opening hand.
Well, I think that's what the deck is trying to do, Shane.
No. So it's like, okay, well, the kind of things I'm losing to are like interesting value decks, right? Where it's like, I'm losing to a Rakdos, or it might have been like a Mardu sort of mid-range Luris style deck, and they find the pieces they need and they put a clock on me. Or I lose to blue-white control because I'm mulling to like 5 or 6 and they have just a few pieces of needed interaction. Or I lose to like Is It Murktide because they have interaction and they're smart enough to play a slow game where they know that they can sort of keep me on the back foot. They can dash out Ragavans. They can get a mana advantage and a card advantage. Those kind of things are all useful for them. It's really easy to be inefficient with this deck, is the main thing. And I think the deck is in itself has potential for high efficiency, but also has many games where it feels bad. And so I think that, like I was getting at earlier, is like, it's one where I think you need to have some reps. I think you have to be able to deal with losing to hate and also playing through hate. And the real issue, though, is I think that you're in an uphill battle, and it's not that fun all the time, because the payoff is still something that can be killed with Unholy Heat. And that's what sucks, is every time it's just like, yep, it can be killed with Unholy Heat. And that still is a real stinker. You know, there's hand disruption, there's counter magic, there's getting burned out before you start gaining life with your Archon. You get ran over by Hammer because you didn't have Solitude in time, or a white card to pitch to your Solitude. Everyone's got Yard Hate. Your alternate game plan is not that great or that fast. There's just a lot of ways to feel like you're in a losing position. And that's where I am with the deck. And, you know, that's maybe where I am, but maybe other people are seeing better.
Last question for you from me.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
What do you think is your best matchup?
Like, just like combo stuff. I think combo stuff in general, because they don't interact with you on the stack very well, typically. And you can frequently have access to Grief, or you sideboard into like the 4 Thoughtseize game plan. So it's just like, you know, you can take care of those decks pretty easily. Mm-hmm. But I feel like a lot of decks take care of it pretty easily. Like non-interactive combo decks, like Hammer is going to eat alive. I think that I think there's ways to have a game plan against like control where you're not going to perform that poorly. I think that I just had some kind of rough matchups against it and rough draws. And I think that's something that you have to learn as well. So I think that you can probably do pretty well against controlling strategies for sure. So I don't know. I think I think it's also just, I think there's a lot of middling matchups, a lot of hard matchups, some good ones. It's a deck in Modern.
And you don't like it.
I don't love it.
Deck in Modern that Shane is off.
I don't love it.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's good to know that this one isn't on your list.
It might still be. I'm gonna keep playing.
Yeah, you bought those beautiful griefs.
I had fun. Then I went 1-4, and then like my last league, it just wasn't that fun to me. But losing never feels good.
I think you should play 2 leagues before you settle.
At least 2, maybe 3.
Guys, let's try to get in 2 leagues before we pick a deck that we're going to fly across the country to play. Okay, let's make sure we do that.
I played like a lot of matches, but the last league was 1-4.
Yeah.
All right, guys. I talked so much this episode. Let's please spend some time on the initial batch of Crimson Vow spoilers. So let's do another quick little break. We'll go into the dive down part 2, so stay with us.
So, Crimson Vow, it's the highly anticipated sequel to Midnight Hunt. Now it's wedding themed. It's a vampire wedding.
They found their bride. Or husband.
Is this one where the people used to say that a play always ends with a funeral or a wedding, like Shakespeare or whatever? What if it's both?
Well, with Shakespeare, the comedies end in weddings.
Sure, some of them end in funerals, right? There's a lot of them. They must have done something different.
Not the comedies. In the tragedies, everyone dies, yes, but I don't think there was even funerals. I took a Shakespeare class in college. I got an A.
Yeah, good job.
Thanks. Still proud of that one. So we'll go through these mechanics really quickly, and then we'll talk about some of the cards and how we feel about the set so far. It is Halloween. We're recording this on Sunday, so we've only had just a few days of spoilers, right? Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
And there have been relatively few of them so far. So we'll talk about what may have jumped out to us, but we're still only looking at the very tip of the iceberg. And I think the perhaps most interesting new mechanic that we're getting here are blood tokens. So these are artifacts, kind of like a clue, because you can pay 1, tap a blood token, discard a card, sack it, and then you draw a card.
I like it.
Yeah, interesting mechanic. I'd be curious to see if there's one. I guess because of the mana cost, it gets kind of rough, but I was just wondering if there's going to be a cheap enough spell that helps enable Dredge or something like that off of these, like sort of in the way that Insolent Neonate did at one point in time, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a typed piece of cardboard, can be made for free, has useful text like discard a card and draw a card. It all depends on what's making them and what's using them, right?
Totally true. Yep.
So
I think we need a 1, maybe a 2 mana spell that creates a blood token and does something else.
Yeah. I'm looking through the spoiler right now to see if there is one.
I didn't see anything, but I was also on an airplane.
Okay. This set also has Transform.
Mostly the same as the first.
I believe you mean Day and Night Bound, my dudes.
It does have Day and Night Bound, but of course it also this one has some more alternate versions, such as something like Wedding Announcement, where there's a special token that goes onto it when certain conditions are met, and then if it has 3 or more invitation tokens on it, it transforms from an enchantment into a different enchantment. Like there's
a lot of weird counters in this one, right?
Yeah, there's other things like that you should keep an eye on that are just kind of novel. Put a counter on something until it transforms, pay an activated cost to have it transform stuff. So it's not all the day night stuff. In fact, I have not seen a ton of those cards so far, but there are a few. But it's still here.
Similar to Transform, Disturb is back.
Yeah.
So this was on a lot of the spirit cards in the last set, but that's the creature that has a Disturb cost. And if it's in your graveyard, you can pay that alt cost, and it comes back as the disturbed creature, which is on the back side of the card.
Yeah, and actually, most of the cards here, if not all of them, I haven't double checked yet, almost all of them are not creatures on the back. They're spirits on the front, and on the back, they turn into auras that you can put.
Or like equipment? Did I see an equipment one?
I haven't seen any equipment ones yet. They're all kind of ghosts that die, and then you can use the aura of what they had to put on one of your creatures as a sort of like blessing. For example, there's one that the disturb cost is a colorless and a white, and it just gives a creature lifelink as an aura.
Still my favorite 90s new metal band. Another new mechanic introduced in this set is training, which is a little bit reminiscent of the old mentor mechanic from Guilds of Ravnica, though it's, I think, worse.
That's interesting. I think it's better, actually.
Okay. All right.
Go ahead.
We'll see.
Yeah.
But basically with training, your creature is buffed if and when it is attacking with another larger creature.
Right.
So basically, if a creature with training is a 2/2 and it's attacking at the same time as a 3/3, the training creature gets a +1/+1 counter.
Yeah. Yep.
What makes you say that it's better than Mentor?
Because I think that Mentor is actually pretty tough because the creature itself, you had to have a constant flow of things with lower power coming in to put tokens on. Whereas I think with training, if you play a big creature and just keep attacking with the same pair, the smaller creature is going to keep getting bigger over time. So those triggers are going to happen. So not only are you going to get more often, I think you're going to have those triggers happen more often, but some of these also have secondary effects that happen when they train. And so you'll probably get that secondary benefit as well more often. So if you attack with, a 1/2 with training or something like that, along with a 4/4 with training, you're going to get 2 triggers instead of 1, essentially. And so I think that I think that it might actually trigger more often. Now, I don't know if I've seen any constructed playable cards, especially for our formats quite yet with training, but I do think that this is a more constructed, viable mechanic than Mentor turned out to be. The best Mentor card was the Goblin Rabble-Master. Because it made tokens. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, Mentor was never really something that was like, legitimate constructed deck, maybe outside of standard.
No, I mean, the Rabble-Master saw play. For sure, even in Modern, it was seen playing like Mono Red Prison at one point in time, which is like medium legit level, but that card did the whole thing. It is what it was. But the other cards were none of them were good enough, yeah.
All right, we have our kicker, maybe modular variant in Cleave. Like, WotC's always going to give us optionality on our cards. Here's the latest variant in Cleave. So basically, there's a casting cost in the upper right, and you do what the card says. But wait, you say, Shane, that sounds like a normal Magic card, but there's more. There's also the cleave cost. If you pay that cleave cost, you then ignore the words in the rule text that are in brackets. So something like dig up goes from green sorcery, search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it in your hand and shuffle, to 1 black, green sorcery, search your library for a card, put it in your hand, and shuffle. So, yeah.
Yeah, and this is something that was in the mystery boosters, in the test cards and the mystery boosters as well.
You're right, it was.
Yep, as a thing. So they managed to turn it to a whole theme of part of the set. Kind of a weird mechanic, but I do think it's a cool one, and it does have the potential to be powerful because you can manipulate different things.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I kind of find it hideous and clumsy, but it's potentially cool.
What's funny is I actually find this to be, from someone who likes to try to minimize word count, I think it's a little bit better than kicker.
It's hyper efficient.
Right?
It's hyper efficient.
Right? Where you would have these kicker spell, because if they had done this with kicker, they just would have written it out like, if you pay the kicker cost, do this thing instead, and have to rewrite the whole sentence. And like, that's just, that's a lot of extra too.
Well, what it actually looks like, I said it was kind of like a modular, maybe like a kicker variant. What it really is just a split card variant.
Yeah, kind of.
I mean, with sort of a word puzzle for the designers to solve.
Right. Yeah, totally.
It's like, what can we put in brackets?
Yeah, what can we make that makes sense in a sentence, if it's there or if it's not there?
So it's just like a funny split card.
80% of the mechanics in Magic are kicker, right? And this one is too. All right. So last one that we have on the list here is Exploit. Zombies have Exploit. Exploit was in Dragons of Tarkir. Cool mechanic. When it sacrifices a creature, you get an extra trigger off of these creatures. I always thought that this was one that had the potential to be good. It saw some standard play, especially with, I forget the name of the card. Sidisi's Faithful was a card that was pretty popular that did Exploit. There's some other things too. But just a cool mechanic, something to do with tokens, things like that. Okay, mechanics. Overall, anybody have any thoughts about these?
Nothing that wows me, but I think Cleave is probably the mechanic that is going to have the most potential unless there's a Broken Blood token card.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just like another cool split style card. I mean, there's been so many of those, but I think that this is the closest to like literal split cards, and I think those can be cool if they just push it a little bit.
All right, so let's get into these cards. Why don't we just do this like round robin, like we've done in the past? Let's just everybody pick a card, like pick cards going around until we run out of time.
Okay.
Okay. Can I just leave now then?
Yeah, you have no cards you want to talk about at all?
Honestly, no. Let's move. Let's go. Let's do it though. Let's see how I
Shane,
can find
what
any.
about Thalia, Guardian of Thraben? I feel like this could see some humans play.
Potential. There's potential there. We'll talk about it.
Definitely. All right. Well,
Dave, you go first.
I'll go first if that's the case. I'm going to throw a curveball out first.
Mm-hmm.
One of the cards that I think is the most interesting that is around, because I'm a person who likes to cast a lot of spells and have payoffs for it, is Manaform Hellkite, which is two generic red for a 4/4 flyer with whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create an XX red dragon illusion creature token with flying and haste, where X is the amount of mana spent to cast that spell. Exile that token at the beginning of the next end step.
I love flying Monastery Mentor.
With haste.
Where the tokens exile at the end.
Right.
This doesn't have haste, but the tokens do.
Right, exactly. I did just take another read through this card, and I realized that it was the amount of mana spent to cast the spell, not the mana value of the spell that was cast. Because I was imagining potentially trying to use this with, something like Delve to be able to make a bigger version. Not that there's a bunch of like excellent Delve spells flying around, but you know what I mean? Trying to cheat on the mana value to cast a whole bunch of spells to kind of push it forward. So a little less interested in it now, but it is an interesting way to turn a deck that maybe wants to cast a whole bunch of cantrips, Manamorphose, stuff like that into something where you just turn them into extra burn spells for a minute. Now, this card never survives, of course, but I do think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's my favorite spoiler episode trope. Is just like, looking at this now, I actually don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
But I'm a sunk cost now.
Yeah, I already started talking about it. I don't think this is modern power, unfortunately, but I thought the design was really cool. But yeah, it doesn't do anything when it comes into play, and that's the biggest problem with this, unless you cast it off curve and then you get to do some stuff.
Yeah, I just don't think so. It's just one of those things, like you said, you have to untap with it. You have to have spells in hand to cast into it. It's already a 4-drop. Like, it's the same things I say about all these cards like this. Just like, what are you going to still have in hand in a red deck? You probably have better options in a controlling red deck. I just don't know. It's a cool design. I totally agree. Like, maybe it's still see standard or pioneer or historic maybe, but definitely not modern.
Yeah.
I got one.
Stanislav.
Path of Peril. 1 black sorcery, cleave, 4 white, destroy all creatures with mana value 2 or less. If you pay the cleave cost, it's just destroy all creatures. This is the one that I thought could see some modern play because 3 mana board wipe to destroy all creatures with mana value 2, I think could be relevant in a lot of modern matchups. This against something like Hammer or Jund Saga right now, or maybe even humans, I think could see a little bit of potential since most of the creatures in humans are 1 and 2 drops.
I mean, but humans is not very good.
But it can be.
Yes. I mean, my issue with this, Stan, is decks that have creatures with mana value 2 or less, that you're going to have enough of them, that you're going to want to have this in your sideboard for, are going to have Luris. And I think Luris just invalidates this card.
Luris takes time still, where if you're doing some stuff to apply pressure, if you're taking advantage of the two mana value things somehow by having creatures that are bigger, or I don't know, like it'll take a little bit of time to rebuild the board.
This is 1 black. This is 1 black. Like I just don't know how this fits into a game plan.
Yeah, I mostly think that this card is not better than Damn is the problem that it has in modern anyway. I think probably,
and that's not really seeing much play.
Yeah, it's only seeing a little bit of play itself. Maybe in a different format, of course, for these Wraths. Maybe it's, this is a card that could be like really good against, even though it runs Luris. Like if blue-white auras was a thing in historic, still like this card could be pretty good against that. It could be pretty good against other low to the ground decks in historic, but and potentially also I guess in Pioneer, but Pioneer's kind of different,
Yeah, I just don't know what deck wants this in modern, because like I think you have other better ways to fight against Hammer. Like I think you have other pieces. You're going to have spot removal. You're going to have artifact removal. I don't know how this fits into a sideboard.
I don't think this is the only removal spell you run in that deck. Like I think because the cleave cost is Orzhov, you can run it with Damn. And I'd rather
no one's casting a 6 mana Wrath, Stan.
Right. I'd rather overload Damn than this, but
Yeah.
Yeah, I think my issue with this is like I don't think it's the casting cost for the effect in modern. Like I just don't really see it, but I'm fine being wrong, as I always say. I just don't know if this is like the tech piece that is going to make Hammer drop in popularity and power, personally. I can add a few more P words there.
Time will tell.
Shane, it's your turn to pick a card that we can tell you that is never going to make it.
Okay. So this is a cool card. Cemetery Protector. I don't know what it's going to do. I don't know. It's too expensive, I think, for the effect. And it has the Hellkite problem of having to untap with it to get value. And even worse than Hellkite, there's some conditional stuff. Cemetery. Let's say that 3 times fast. Cemetery Protector. 2 white for a human soldier creature with flash. 3/4. When it ETBs, you exile a card from a graveyard whenever you play a land or cast a spell. If it shares a card type with the exiled card, create a 1/1 white human creature token. So you have to cast a 4 mana, 3/4. You have to untap with it. Or you have to have a card to exile from a graveyard that then lines up with cards you will have in hand or draw off the top of your deck to then make a 1/1 white human creature token.
Yeah, but you don't have to do that, though. I mean, I think that the main thing that this card is supposed to do is give you a threat that lets you flash in and exile a card out of your opponent's graveyard.
And you know what else does that?
Oh, endurance?
Endurance.
Yeah, that is the thing about this is that endurance is pretty good.
I mean, this is definitely like a historic potential power level, if that. But like even in historic, like it's just that's hyper efficient of a format too. So I just don't know what this does anywhere.
But I do think that you're playing it for the enters the battlefield more than the graveyard tokens, really. So
yeah.
if you need this as a sideboard piece, or if you need this in a metagame where there's a lot of graveyard stuff, like I could see this being a thing. It's expensive, but I just don't think it does enough. But I mean, I think this is a mythic in this format, by the way. This is the mythics they're giving us. So that might tell you something about the potential power level of the format. And I say that, and then the episode's going to be released, and there's going to be like, did you guys see all these cards that got released on Monday and Tuesday? And I'm going to look really dumb. Well, yeah. I mean, there's 50.
That's typical.
There's going to be 50 Cemetery Protector decks. So
the Shane looking dumb, you mean? Yeah. I mean, that's just how I roll.
All right. I got a card to throw out to you all.
Hit me.
It costs 1 generic red.
Anger of the Gods.
It's Chandra Dressed to Kill.
Yeah.
Plus, it's a 3 loyalty planeswalker. +1, add a red. Chandra Dressed to Kill deals 1 damage to up to 1 target player or planeswalker. +1, exile the top card of your library. If it's red, you may cast it this turn. And -7, exile the top 5 cards of your library. You may cast red spells from among them this turn. You get an emblem with whenever you cast a red spell. This emblem deals X damage to any target where X is the amount of mana spent to cast that spell.
Best thing about this card is the extended art variant. It's glorious. Perfection.
It is nice. She indeed looks dressed to kill. Now, here's what I think about this card. I saw a couple of different ways that people were talking about this that I thought were interesting. One is our friend, Stan's friend, M. Hayashi, has been tweeting about this card a bit, talking about using this in Obosh Red in Modern instead of Hammer of Bogarden as that 3-drop.
Cut Hammer of Bogarden.
Yeah, it's the best card in the deck.
He's talking about it. And I think that this seems like a pretty viable replacement for something like that, honestly, because you have so many 1-drops in the way that those decks are played right now that you're quite likely going to be able to +1 it and cast another spell on turn 4. You could drop a Dragon's Rage Channeler, you could drop a Ragavan, maybe your second Ragavan that died, Lightning Bolt somebody, something like that. I think that the mana efficiency of Modern is so good that getting the damage plus the mana at a lower CMC in a deck like those Obosh mono red decks could actually be pretty good. The second thing is getting to draw cards on subsequent turns. It's going to be good in that deck. It helps that deck out a lot. You're never going to get to the ultimate, but that's fine. I just thought it was interesting. And in some ways, this is like I don't want to do that false equivalency thing, but like it's sort of a 2-mana planeswalker, right?
Sort of.
I think you're more likely to be able to use this than other times.
I mean, I am looking at this and I'm like, how far off Ren and 6 is this?
Well,
in a lot of ways. Like we know the power of a ping with a Ren and 6. Like, I mean,
doesn't
of course,
target
It doesn't
creatures
hit
though.
creatures.
Oh well, never mind then.
Yeah.
It's
I mean, it's a 3 mana worse non-Modern Horizons Planeswalker that still does some cool stuff. Like especially if the exile a top card may cast it. That's, I think, superior than just getting a land back frequently. But
Yeah.
I think the card that I would compare this to is Chandra Torch of Defiance.
Yeah.
And what I'm wondering is whether or not this is better than that in like chunky red decks in some of the newer formats, Historic Pioneer, or if it can replace Chandra in Panza. Because I do like this as a potential turn 2 spell that then generates you mana throughout the game and can potentially generate extra cards. Since, at least in Panza, once you get to a certain point, you don't care about your green spells anymore.
Yeah,
And
that makes
that's why
sense.
that second +1 is so worthwhile. Like Arbor Elf can suck it.
Yeah. I mean, Chandra Torch of Defiance is so good, but this is just, it's a mana faster or slower than this card is. And so that makes a huge difference. I don't know. I think there's some potential this card.
Like this both generates mana and gives you a clock and can be card advantage.
Yeah.
And I think all those things combined makes this an interesting pick.
Yeah. So I think there's some possibilities here.
Yeah, I don't even know how I missed that one. Good find, Dave. What do we think about Dig Up? I mean, it's probably not good enough, right? Like that's the one with the green basic land, 1 black green for just a tutor.
No, it's too expensive. I mean, I like that it's a single mana spell that has a fallback, but I don't think that makes it good enough to make what's it called, Diabolic Tutor playable. Which is what the cleave cost is.
For me, I think the question is, do we see any other cards that are even worth talking about for Modern? Or can we just admit, like, for the most part, from what we've seen so far, this probably isn't going to impact that format, and we're really just going to be talking about Historic Pioneer and other, wishful thinking.
Yeah, just be Cool Cards Inc.
Yeah, I think we can admit that.
Cool.
These cards can be cool still.
I'll throw out Geist Lightsnare.
Yes.
Conditional counterspell, potentially a 1-mana leak.
I mean, I love Mana Beak. I love Pirate Beak.
Geist Lightsnare, 2 and a blue for an instant. This spell costs 1 color, 1 generic less if you control a spirit. It also costs 1 generic less if you control an enchantment counter target spell unless its controller pays 3. So we do have some powerful spirits in lots of different formats. I wonder if there's any enchantment worth running in a deck with this. Like the way we have Bomat Courier as this like occasional incidental artifact, or Mishra's Bauble as this incidental artifact. What are, quote, incidental enchantments that we might want to add? Is it just Theros creatures? Or is it maybe omens from the Theros set? Or do we just admit that this is probably going to be, at best, a 2-mana leak variant in formats that don't have mana leak?
I mean, I think if there's a 1 mana cost disturb card, like a spirit from here that on the backside gives vigilance for 1 white, which seems like something that might be on rate for what they do sometimes, I could see that going into kind of like your blue-white kind of spiritsy deck in Pioneer or in Historic, depending on where you're at. And then this can become a 1-mana leak because it's got the enchantment and on the other side. I also think you could play this. What's that card? Sentinelize? The escape card that lets you, that one's been pretty good in a lot of different formats for single white. And then it has the escape for a single white as well. So I think that there's some cards like that might be good enough to make this make sense. In your Lofty Denial plus this deck, if you're not playing pirates, kind of.
Perhaps worth noting, they are finishing the cycle of slow lands, the slow duels. So, for instance, we have the enemy colored when it enters the battlefield it enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 other lands.
Yeah. We'll see about these. I don't think that there's been enough play yet. Obviously they haven't made any impact in Modern, but we'll see if they make an impact anywhere else still. But I'm glad that they finished the whole cycle right now.
I think I've seen, I know I've seen them in Historic because I play Arena still a little bit, and I'm pretty sure I've seen them pop up in certain Pioneer decks that don't have the allied color or enemy colored fast lands.
Yep.
So speaking of playing Arena, by the way, I got a new phone, and Arena loads like in less than half the time, and it really has made me want to play Arena again.
Wow.
Just because
Just like that.
I can I mean, I'm not like grinding it or anything, but it's just like, oh yeah, I can play Arena. That's fine. Perfect. Speaking of Arena and Arena formats, Bedsheet Elemental, that's kind of it's a translated name from Scryfall. It's a white 2/2 Spirit Cleric. Whenever you gain life, put a 1/1 counter on Bedsheet Elemental. As long as it has 4 or more 1/1 counters on it, it has Flying and Vigilance. As long as it has 10 or more 1/1 counters, you've already won the game, but it has Indestructible. Yeah, I mean, this goes into all, like, people flipping love life gain decks.
And they love a Johnny's Pride Mate, and this is just better than a Johnny's Pride Mate. Like, full stop.
Is this basically strictly better?
Is
a Johnny's Pride Mate white?
No, Johnny's,
or is it one in a white?
It's generic in a white, so it's not strictly better, but yeah.
Yeah, it is generally better. Pretty good.
Yeah, I think this card is definitely going to see play somewhere. It also goes directly into the Angels deck, I think, is like another payoff as well. But
you know what's good with this too, Dave, is this is going to be good in like those, what is the white creature that puts counters on things at the beginning of the attack step type thing, like, so that'll go well with that in terms of more quickly getting Flying and Vigilance on the thing. So
Luminarch
Aspirant. All sorts of synergy. Yeah, Luminarch Aspirant. Yeah, so there's just a lot of ways to like power this thing up and have it be a Flying Vigilance 6/6 or something like that, and that's going to be annoying.
Totally. All right, I got a card that I don't think is good enough for Modern, but I think it's interesting to talk about for a minute, and that is Dread Fugue, which is a single black for a sorcery, and it says it has cleave. I'll read you the non-cleave first. It says target player reveals their hand. You choose a non-land card from it with mana value 2 or less. That player discards that card. So it is Inquisition of Kozilek, but for 2 CMC instead of 3 CMC. And then the cleave cost is 2 generic and a black, and you can just have them discard any non-land card if you pay the cleave cost. So this card gave me pause, just because I feel like the mana curve of Modern is going down so much that I'm like, could we get away with playing this card instead of Inquisition and Kozilek? And then occasionally when you top deck it later in the game, you're less mad about top decking Inquisition and Kozilek because you probably have some extra mana and can Thoughtseize someone. And in case that's not going to happen, because I think it's really unlikely to happen, maybe this is just a card that completes the 8 single mana discard package in Pioneer, because Pioneer does not have access to Inquisition and Kozilek. Discuss.
Yes.
I
don't think this is a Modern card. I just co-signed what you said. Like, maybe this gets there in Pioneer. In like that red-black Arcanist deck that's still kicking around.
Mm-hmm.
Target player reveals their hand. Choose a non-land card from it. I mean, sure. I mean, that seems fine. That's pretty good. Yeah, why not? I think like people, we've seen things like various discard variants get played in sideboards where they make sense, and I think that this is a perfectly viable one.
Yeah.
So, and I think, like you said, it's that's that kind of scenario where like it's maybe it's like a Pioneer sideboard card, and it has play against certain decks, and at some point in time, it makes sense in the meta to be in your sideboard.
Do you think this is even sideboard? I think that this card could just be main. Could be like a 4/3 situation in Pioneer or something like that.
Yeah, it really depends on how compressed the average mana value is, right? Where it's like, am I seeing a ton of low CMC decks, and is it becoming more efficient? Then, as the more efficient the format is, the better this card is.
All right, Shane, you got another one?
I think there's some there's cool cards like Change of Fortune. It's 4 mana. So it's 3 in a red for a sorcery. Is a rare. You discard. It's got cool art. So those are the cool things about it. You discard your hand, then draw a card for each card you've discarded this turn. So you see the issue of this card, which is you have to have cards in hand to discard, and then you draw into new cards. So it's a wheel effect. It's a Wheel of Fortune type effect, but unfortunately, it doesn't just draw you a fresh hand. You have to have cards. So I don't know these are the kind of things that can do stuff. They can do things, right? But I don't know about at that CMC. It's probably more of an EDH style card, but who knows?
Yeah, I think this card's pretty impossible to make good in formats we care about. But
did you see anything, Stan? I know that you were also interested in this card. Did you see anything that you were just like, I see an option here, or was it kind of like it does something novel, so it might be an option?
I love the art on this card.
That's the important thing. The art's very cool. It's very comic-y.
Yeah. I mean, this is either a combo card or nothing at all.
Right.
I don't think this is a value card. But maybe you can like find new ways to combo off with like a hollow one type card, or maybe something else with using this as a graveyard enabler. But I think this is the kind of card that you play this because it's 4 mana. It has to do something or enable something really big that turn or the next turn.
Yeah, like what if you did nothing till turn 4, then you cast this and a bunch of cool stuff happened? But that's living the dream.
That's kind of what it has to do, right?
Dave, did you also? I think you have a cool combo enabling type card picked out. It's a frog. It's a frog, Dave.
Oh, the frog.
Croak counters.
Yeah, I don't know. I saw this card. So this is Grolnok, the Omnivore, for 2 generic, a green and a blue. It's a legendary frog. It's a 3/3. And it says, whenever a frog you control attacks, mill 3 cards. Whenever a permanent card is put into your graveyard from play, exile it with a croak counter.
Ribbit.
You may play lands and cast spells from among cards you own in exile with croak counters. I don't know what this card is. I wrote it down last night. I was like, this card is cool, I guess, but I don't think this is a thing.
I just want to be like, can we use the purple dice representing croak counters?
I mean, put it with your Gitrog monster and go to town with your Sultai Gitrog deck that you could play in Pioneer, I guess.
Croak counters. That's one of my favorite.
You probably croak if you play this card. That's all.
Probably.
That's all I have to say.
We got Demonic Bargain. 2 and a black sorcery where you exile 13 off the top of your library. Then you search the rest of your library for a card and put it into your hand.
Yeah, I just think that's 3 is still too expensive for a tutor. Like it's too pricey. Like Demonic Tutor and Vampiric Tutor are good because they're 1 and 2 mana. Like 3 is just too much.
It's weird that mana efficiency makes them good. It's just
This is where we went wrong with Otherworldly Gaze, where I was like, it's not good enough at 2 mana, so why would it be good enough at 1 mana? Duh.
Dave, this is that artifact.
I'm never gonna let it go. All right. Well, look, I think we're gonna come back for some spoilers later. Why don't we?
I sure hope so.
Why don't we shuffle on out of here? We have a wedding to attend. It's almost midnight. It's time for the midnight wedding, where I fall asleep, I guess. We're not going to talk about such other highlights as Sorin the Mirthless, Will-Involved Oddity, Overcharged Amalgam. We'll look at these next week.
Cool Mountains. That's actually a really cool mountain.
Alchemist Gambit. Don't even want to talk about that card ever because I think it's probably going to break standard, so we're going to hear about it for the next 2 years again.
Really?
But I don't know. It's just another take an extra turn card.
Oh, cool. Stan, what do you think?
Here's what I'll say. We feel a little sleepy about this set, and maybe that's a good thing.
Oh my gosh.
Maybe
fine.
we don't need a ton of new modern technology. I think a lot of our listeners will agree that no one is in the mood for a modern rotation right now.
Yeah, I don't need like another $30 mythic that I have to buy to keep my decks up to date, honestly.
So
Totally.
How much is Chandra Dressed to Kill ordering for?
I think, is she mythic? Yeah, she is, isn't she?
She's a Planeswalker.
They're always mythic and not in War of the Spark.
Right, and Price of Peril is a rare, so we know that'll be cheap.
Yep.
And it's gonna be killing me playing Hammer. I just know it. I'm gonna be like, Stan, why'd you tell them?
That's right. But if we find powerful cards next week or once we have the full spoiler, all the better. But I don't think we're necessarily disappointed in the power level of the set so far. And I think maybe even on some level, we're kind of hoping that this is primarily standard, historic, pioneer level stuff. Because Modern's awesome right now, and we just got a huge influx of technology. It's made the format maybe the most expensive it's ever been. Do we need more churn? I take your silence as a resounding no. And that wraps up this week's episode, not with a whimper, but with a silent no. If you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe to our podcast so you get the latest episodes as soon as they come out. And if you use Apple Podcasts, please leave us a rating and review. If you'd like to submit a question to our show, you can tweet us at @thedivedown, all one word. You can email thedivedown@gmail.com, or you can submit an audio question that may appear on a future episode of The Dive Down over at podinbox.com/thedivedown. If you'd like to support our podcast, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/thedivedown. Support us at any tier to get into the Discord, or at higher tiers to get some swag. Also, shout out to manatraders.com for sponsoring The Dive Down. If you sign up for ManaTraders using promo code TheDiveDown 2021, you'll get 15% off your first 2 months of renting Magic Online cards. As always, special thanks to the bands Nowhere and Spaceblood for letting us use their music. And until next week, get out there and dry clean your tuxedos. So I am feeling myself, 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 feeling myself.